Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching from. This is the Scholars Table. I'm your host, Dr. Banda Khalifa. I'm a physician and a current PhD student here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. On this episode of the Scholars Table, we have a scholar from Nigeria who is currently a PhD candidate at the McGill University with a research focus in pharmacoepidemiology. She has over 6 years that spans clinical pharmacy, community pharmacy, public health, and then global health research. She has worked with multiple organizations, including the Commonwealth Pharmacists Association and the Scottish Government, and also the government of Nigeria. She's been awarded multiple scholarships like the Chevening Scholarship, the Commonwealth Scholarship, the Mark Winberg Fellowship Award, and a doctoral training partnership with the UK government. Without boring you with so much information, let me invite our guest to come on the Scholars Table. And welcome to the Scholars Table. Omotayo, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, and you?
I'm good. I'm good. Your name gave you out that, anybody who knows how Nigerian names are distinct, the moment I saw your name, I realized, hey, it's from Nigeria. And perhaps our jollof rice is still better than Nigerian jollof rice. By the way, so as a way of introduction, I know I've engaged a lot of students, a lot of scholars from across the globe, but particularly most of the scholars have been from the US, right? And when I saw your profile, I felt it would be important to get another perspective from a different institution. And we all know McGill University is one of the prestigious universities in Canada and North America. So we're excited to have you here on the program. But for those who uh, haven't seen your work before, haven't heard of you before, can you briefly describe your background and what you were doing back in Nigeria before you decided to pursue graduate school?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Banda, for having me. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, very clear.
Okay, okay, cool. I'll be very brief. My background is in pharmacy, so I had my undergraduate degree in pharmacy. I graduated with a Bachelor of Pharmacy, and then I worked briefly for like 3 years. So when I graduated, I did my internship, which was necessary to be licensed to practice in Nigeria as a pharmacist. And then I went through, there's this program we call the NYSC program that Nigerians would be quite familiar with. Basically, it's a 1 year program where you get to serve your country. And for me as a pharmacist, I worked in a hospital during this period. And then after that, I worked in a community pharmacy. So that was like about 3 years. While I was doing all of this, my interest in research, began to grow, and I was involved in, a couple of studies, and I just felt I really love this, and I would love to, pursue research. And so while I was working, I got a role with the Commonwealth Pharmacist Association, an internship, so I was the Global Antimicrobial Resistance intern for over a 1 year period. Basically, my work was to support the design and development of programs to improve antimicrobial stewardship in low and middle income countries. We had a couple of projects running, and I supported this work. And then after that, I moved on to work as a research and projects officer, where I was involved in also designing and supporting the implementation of these programs, but it was more of a research-based role. So we would implement programs and evaluate the effectiveness of these programs and develop toolkits and all of these amazing resources for people in low and middle income countries to combat antimicrobial resistance, basically. So I did some of that work, and during that period, I began my master's degree. So you mentioned the fact that I received a Chevening and Commonwealth scholarship. That was sometime in 2020. So I pursued a master's degree in public health at the University of Glasgow. Then I graduated a year later. So UK master's degrees are very intense, and they're for a 1 year period. While I was doing my master's, I was still, involved in some work with the Commonwealth Pharmacist Association. Then after that, I knew I wanted to do a PhD, but I didn't start immediately. So I worked with the Scottish government for a bit my work was also related to antimicrobial resistance and some other projects the Scottish government was into at the time. And so I did all of that work. And while I was doing that, I applied for my PhD program here. And yeah, I began my PhD. I hope I was able to give a concise background about myself.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that concise introduction. It seems like you have a very rich background from pharmacy to research and now to public health. But what really was your motivation to kind of pivot to a PhD program, especially in Canada, in McGill? Did you consider any other PhD programs?
Yeah, so I did absolutely. So when people ask, most people feel I really wanted Canada specifically. I would say I wasn't really big on Canada. I was more concerned about the program. I just wanted, so my attraction to public health basically was EPI. I attended a conference in my final year when I was in pharmacy school, and there was this professor who came. He was working with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and a couple of other institutions. He was a global health person, and so he came to my university and he gave this presentation. It was really amazing, and I learned about public health and the role pharmacists could play. And he said a lot about epidemiology, and I felt this is so interesting. So my work as a pharmacist in the hospital or the community was really had to do with specific patients, right? So you dealt with like specific patients and your role was more patient centered, but with epidemiology I saw that my work could involve or influence populations, so I could make change at the population level. I was also very much interested, so when I started my master's program I was very much interested in the methods I had learned, and I really loved epi right from time. And so when I was thinking about a PhD program, I really just wanted a program that was I just wanted a very good epidemiology program. And so I did my research and I found that McGill had a very good program. And they also had, so you mentioned that I'm currently doing my research in pharmacoepidemiology. So obviously my background is in pharmacy. McGill has a very good pharmacoepidemiology program that's known within North America. Like people know my supervisors and like people, they collaborate widely with researchers globally in pharmacoepi. So they have a very good pharmacoepi program. So that was my main attraction to applying to my current program.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't dispute that. I remember when I was applying for my first cycle of PhD programs, and I applied to only schools in the US. I spoke with my advisor, and he's also very, you know, well versed in pharmacoepi, and he told me, "You want to do pharmacoepi? Have you considered McGill?" And I was like, why? He said you should check them out. They are one of the best programs you can get if you want to do pharmacotherapy. So I applied to McGill as well. I think that was in 2020. So I mean, it makes sense that your interest in pharmacotherapy really was the pull factor towards McGill University. But how is your funding? How is the funding scheme like for PhD students at McGill?
Okay. So when I was admitted, things change every year. So what I always recommend is, and what I did. So before I came in, I exchanged, like if you check my email chain with the program, with the graduate program coordinator, probably over 20 emails,
Hmm.
because I was confirming and checking all the details. Okay, so you said you're going to give this funding, for how long is it? What is it going to cover? What is it not going to cover? I wanted to be very sure, right? So at the time I applied, the moment you get admission, it comes with funding. They recommend identifying a supervisor before you apply, but it's not a requirement, right? So it increases your chances clearly. But I know people who were admitted without supervisors, and I know people who got someone to supervise them but did not get admitted. So it's not a guarantee, but it's recommended. So if you're giving admission, it comes with funding. The funding comes from the department and your supervisor. Um, so when you've identified a supervisor, for example, if someone agrees to supervise you, it means they have some funding to support you. If you're not able to identify a supervisor, when you come in, you'll be advised to quickly get a supervisor so that you get that part of the funding that comes from the supervisor, and then you get a part of the funding that comes from the department. But at giving you admission, like when the department gives you an admission, it means they are committed to giving you the funding that comes from them. Most people come in and they have already have a supervisor. For those who do not have, the department would help, in securing a supervisor as soon as possible. Yeah, that's a different discussion, but yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
know if that's clear enough.
Yes, I think that's clear. So for anyone who is coming in one way or the other, the person gets some form of funding, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Is this funding adequate to cover all your tuition and then some living expenses?
yes. So it depends on how you live, but yeah, it depends
Yeah,
on
that's funny.
how you
Yeah.
spend and all of that. Um, so my what I get is enough for me to pay my fees. So you get the funding, but you get to pay your fees. But the good thing is you pay the fees at the Canadian rate. So the university for PhD students in my program, the university for international students, they let you pay at the Canadian rate.
Okay.
And I pay my fees from what I get, and I'm still able to live, a decent life. So it depends on how much you spend per month, what you
Yeah.
eat, where you stay, how much you travel, but you'd be able to survive.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Mm-hmm.
I would
Okay.
say, yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. And this
Not
funding is
like extra, like you won't be able to live an extravagant
yes, yes,
life.
I understand. So, okay, so this funding lasts for the entirety of your program, right? For 4, 5 years.
Yeah, so the funding lasts for, good question. I think it lasts for 4 years, but there's something I forgot to mention. So the moment you get in, they're gonna let you know that there are several funding applications you
Option.
can submit. So
Okay.
there's the FRQS funding that comes from the Quebec government. There's the CIHR funding that comes from the Canadian government, but that's only for permanent residents and Canadian citizens. So, for example, I couldn't apply because I'm not I don't fall within that category. But I applied for FRQS. Then there's also the Vanier scholarship um, that comes from the Canadian government as well. So most people get some form of funding when they come in. So the department wouldn't even need to fund you anymore, or your
Okay.
supervisor wouldn't need to fund you anymore. You would be able to apply for those funding opportunities. I applied for some in my first year and I got them, although those were just minor words. Um, I got those, and then I applied for some at the beginning of my second year, and I'm waiting for the results. And if I get those, then my supervisor and the department don't need to bother about me anymore. My funding is going to come from the government till I finish my program.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
To pivot slightly to the PhD application process, could you walk us briefly through your experience applying to PhD programs in Canada and elsewhere, if you did?
Okay. Okay, I'll do that. Maybe I should start with McGill, then I'll move to the other ones. Is that
Mhm.
okay? Or you?
Yeah, that's
Yeah. So for McGill, all I needed to do was submit all the required documents. Interestingly, there's no interview. I wasn't interviewed. I don't know what other things the admission committee considers because
fine. Mm-hmm.
there's someone I assisted with the application and I thought they were a very strong candidate, but just somehow they didn't get in. So I I mean I don't know the other things, right? Because if there's no interview, then there's clearly other things they look at. Maybe they check some other things and but basically all you need to do is submit your documents. So your transcripts, all your previous transcripts,
Okay.
um, your CV, a statement of purpose. Then initially, or in previous years, they required the GRE. I don't know if they've changed that, but when I applied, they the GRE was not compulsory, so you could submit a quantitative training document that proved that you had some form of quantitative training. Because in my program, you're going to do a lot of you're going to do some biostatistics, and you're going to do some, there'll be a lot of quantitative stuff that requires a very good background in, statistics and quantitative stuff basically. So I had to submit a document I had to submit the syllabus from my undergrad, the subjects that covered some quantitative training. So I did some mathematics courses as an undergraduate, and then I did statistics, and I did some computational work during my master's degree. So I had to submit the syllabus from my university that stated all the things I had covered in mathematics and all of that, like all the differentiation, integration, and calculus and all
Yeah.
those things.
Mhm.
Then I had to submit the evidence from my master's degree that also mentioned the fact that I had done some very good statistics and I had worked with R, and I had some form of computational training. So I submitted all of these alongside my application. So that was what substituted GRE for me.
Okay.
Um, then, because I studied at the University of Glasgow, I didn't need to provide any form of English language evidence or IELTS or
Yeah.
anything. Because
Hmm.
when I emailed them, I was like, I have a master's degree from the UK. Clearly, I can speak English and I can write and I can do everything in English.
Yeah.
So the department said it's fine if you have that, it's okay. I don't know what it's going to be like for someone coming probably from Nigeria. I don't know if it's going to be compulsory to have IELTS. I would recommend emailing the department to find out what they would be willing to accept or not accept.
Yeah.
I also submitted, what else did I submit? I think, so I've mentioned my transcripts, my
Hmm.
CV, statement of
CV.
purpose, quantitative training documents, English language requirements, my recommendation letters.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it had to be academic referees. They were not going to accept any other referees. So I had to contact and one of them had to be your supervisor from your most current degree. So my master's degree supervisor had to be one of my referees, and my academic advisor while I was at the university as well. She knew me. She's been a very good, like whenever I need a referee, she's always there. So I had two of them be my referees. Um, I don't know if you want me to say a little bit more about choosing referees, but yeah, maybe we would still come to that subsequently. But if you want
Yeah.
me to talk about it now, it's okay.
Hmm. Okay. So you've laid down the basic requirements
Yeah.
for the program. Um, did you apply to any other programs, any other PhD programs, or were you considering applying to any other PhD programs?
Yeah. So I applied to some others. I got one in the UK, but I did McGill. I came to McGill instead because of the program. I
Yes.
was very big on. I just wanted a very solid EP program.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's why I came to McGill. But I applied for some other. I applied for two in the UK, and I think the requirements, the documents you submit are quite similar. I wasn't going to need to provide any English
Yeah.
language evidence because obviously I had a UK degree. So I think it's the same. Those had interviews though. McGill didn't have an interview. I applied to the University of Washington,
Oh,
but somehow I felt that I was not an ideal candidate because the program had a bit of pharmacoepi, but it also was like health outcomes related,
okay.
and had some health economics. I did health economics during my master's, but as a course, that was all the health economics training I had. And so I wasn't sure I was the most ideal PhD candidate for
Yeah.
them because I didn't get into the program. Yeah. So my eligibility was probably not,
Yeah.
strong. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like us to go a bit into your experience preparing for your interviews. I know you didn't
Okay.
interview for McGill, but definitely you did for the other programs.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of people have reached out that they are preparing for interview in the coming days. So hopefully, your experience will help them in their preparation. Okay. So you made mention that you did interview for a couple of programs, and I know a lot of students or prospective applicants are looking for resources on how to prepare for PhD interviews. So yeah, I think you would be a very good resource for them. Can you describe, some of the key steps you took to prepare for your PhD interviews, and you could also tell us how many interviews you actually did.
Okay. Okay. So I've done a couple of interviews, not too many in my life. But okay, so the first thing I do when preparing for an interview is I try to ask myself to think about all the questions I could be asked, right? So not everyone has to do this, but I write out all these questions and I type out responses and I rehearse these responses. Sometimes I get asked those specific questions, and sometimes I get asked other questions I had no idea I was going to be asked. And we're going to come to how to get to answer those questions. So I think that's the first thing for me, thinking about all the things you could be asked. Um, so once you do that, now preparing your responses to those questions or rehearsing how to respond to those questions, I always use, and I use this for both writing and interviews, I use the STAR approach. It depends on the question you're asked to. So if you're asked a question that relates to something you've done in the past, or if you're asked a question that relates to some specific experience,
Mhm.
right? The best approach to use is the STAR approach. And I assume that most people listening to this are probably familiar with it, but I'll just go by it briefly. So STAR stands for the situation, S stands for the situation, T stands for the task, stands for the action, and R stands for the results. So, for example, if I say, "Tell me about how you have, demonstrated this, and that," you shouldn't just go around the bush giving me a generic response. You should say,
Mhm.
I've demonstrated this, and that, skill in this way, right? There was this situation, and then this was what was required to be done, and then this was what I did, and this was the result of what I did, right? So
Yeah.
you've told a story. Stories stick with people, and stories get to people beyond all the generic, information you could just be mentioning, rather than mention specific leadership skills, for example, or specific, things relating to your experience. You probably want to give some stories. It's okay to say some other things, right? Chip in here and there, but in your stories, you could slot in these things. So, for example, if you're looking for specific skills, you could slot the skills while you're telling your story, or your story
Mhm.
should show how you demonstrated these skills.
Yeah.
Um, so, for example, could I talk about the few questions they normally ask?
Yeah. So, uh, before we come to that specific section, I want you
Okay.
to briefly, for example, tell us how you did your initial research, how you gathered information about your panelists, the people you're going to talk to, the program itself. What were the critical information that you gathered before you even appeared on the interview?
Okay. So the first thing was I read about the program.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I read about the topic, the research topic, the program that was hosting. Just because in the UK usually there's a specific topic, but it's hosted within a specific department, for example. So I read about the topic, and then I would Google the supervisors. The supervisors, most times, not all the time, but sometimes, are not usually a part of your interview. But I'd Google the supervisors, go to their research profiles, check their current research and all the work they are doing, and how my work fits into the work they are doing. You know, then it's also important to Google the program as well. You want to be quite familiar with whatever specific things they would mention to you during the interview. So you want to know a lot about the program. It's difficult to know who is going to be on your interview panel. From my experience, I've never gotten to know who I would get to meet. So that's a difficult one to predict. The other thing I did for McGill, well, you could do for other interviews, is I reached out to people in the program. So for McGill, I reached out to at least five people on LinkedIn, and I asked them specific questions. And they were one of the reasons why I chose McGill, because I got very impressive responses from like 4 or 5 different people on LinkedIn that had no idea I was like texting. Like,
Yeah.
they were colleagues, but they had no idea. They probably discussed it. I don't know, but they gave me a lot of information that I probably wouldn't have been able to find out from the website or anywhere else. So you probably want to interact with people currently in the program. I also spoke to them when I was thinking about the choice of a supervisor. I tried to look for people supervised by that person, and spoke to them. So this is related to the interview. You could speak to them to get like very specific
Yeah.
information that you probably are unable to find on the website. And if anything is not clear, I would recommend emailing the department. They would respond to almost any question you ask, except it's a question that they should not respond to. But in terms of getting information, check the website, check the program, Google the supervisors, look at their research footprints, what are the people they collaborate with. You could see their co-authors, and all of this information. Then speak to people who are currently in the program. LinkedIn is a very good resource. Most people respond on LinkedIn, and then email the department, basically. I think
Okay.
in terms of getting information, that's what works for me.
Yeah, I think that is pretty universal for a lot of interviews, and taking your time to go through the program, researching the specific details of the department and the kind of work they're doing. It's very very important. Now let's talk about the common interview questions. So all the programs that you interviewed, if you were to list, let's say, the five common questions that run through those programs, what would those questions be?
Okay. So for me, the first one is, why are you interested in doing this PhD? That was always the first question that popped up. Why are you, interested in this? Some of them would ask why you're interested in a PhD, just why you want to do a PhD at this point. Some others would ask why you're very much interested in the specific program. So you want to be able to demonstrate your motivation for the program. I would say be original, as much as possible. Be original and be honest. So for me, in all my statements of purpose, and it's the truth, right? I had a lecture in my penultimate year that kind of moved me towards AMR. There's an AMR, global health, public health are very much linked. So it was in my penultimate year, I had this lecture on AMR, and I was so engrossed and so interested in AMR. And that was what made me attend the conference in my final year. And that was when I learned about epidemiology, right? And then I got involved in research in one way or the other. And then I did some work, and then I found myself where I was, right? And then I pursued a master's degree, and I really loved research, and I wanted to go deeper into research. So that was my story, and that was how I told it. So we all, whoever's watching this, has a story, and I would say just tell your story as genuinely as you can when you're asked why you're interested in the program. I keep using the word story because stories work. I'm not saying you should. Okay, so some people write a statement of purpose, or for example, an interview, and they're talking about when they were 5 years old. I don't really, I don't really support all of those, but like
Yeah,
something genuine, right? If I talk about
yeah.
something that happened during my undergrad, that's okay. Let's talk about something that happened at a conference, that's fine. During my master's, that's okay, right? Collaborating with people while doing this research or while reading this paper, or I stumbled on this on the NIH website or the FDA's website, and I did some reading about it and everything. Those make sense. Yeah.
Okay. So
Then
tell me about uh, tell, why are you interested in this PhD program? Okay. What are that question was pretty common across?
the next question I think they would normally ask, okay, well, it doesn't come in this order, but they would also ask for your strengths and weaknesses. That's usually one of the last questions. I've seen different people suggest how to answer this question, and I'm not saying there's a universal way because you're going to be interviewed by different people. So what the response one person might find impressive may not be what someone else is going to find impressive. I would also say be authentic, but don't shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
If you are stating strengths, that's a very good opportunity to sell yourself and still use the STAR approach. So you don't just say that, for example, you have depending on what strength you want to mention, describe the strength with something that has happened and how you were able to work around it and how that demonstrates this strength. Don't mention like 5 things and just litter the whole interview room with all your strengths.
Yes.
Be specific. Pick something that's solid and talk about it. Something that's going to be very useful, a transferable skill for your PhD program. For your weaknesses. So I read something recently, and someone said some people would mention a strength and chip it in as like a weakness, and I don't think that's advisable. Like when they say your weaknesses, like I said, don't shoot yourself in the foot. Don't say you ever get anything done.
Yeah.
You don't say that. But we all have weaknesses, right?
Yeah.
Say something that's a genuine weakness, but not something that would, because you want to put your best foot forward. And so just be honest.
Okay.
And don't, for example, you talk about the weakness, but you could also talk about how you're working on that weakness, or for example,
That's,
specific
yeah.
strategies you've taken to overcome that weakness, or how you've improved over the years, with respect to that thing you're working on. So I think that shows that you've acknowledged and identified this weakness, and you're working on it, and you're becoming a better person. I think that's a good way to approach that question.
Yeah. So okay. So why are you interested in a PhD? Why are you interested in this specific program? I guess, and then tell us about your strengths and weaknesses. That is like some of the last behavioral questions that you would likely get. But in your experience, if, for example, at the end of the interview, the interviewers ask you, "Do you have any questions?" Uh,
Yeah.
what are some of the questions that you think it's usually compelling enough for people to ask? Because I've met a couple of people who would just say, "Oh, I don't have any questions for now," which is pretty, which is not a standard. If you want to make an impression, you need to at least have a question in mind. So, what question in your experience do you think are good questions to ask the interview panel?
Okay. I got that question. I think I agree. It comes up frequently. I would say that I think it's good to ask a question that shows that you are very interested in this program and you've done your homework.
Hmm.
So something specific to the program. So I know someone who got like four offers. She got offers from Emory, McGill, Michigan, and one other university. And she actually came to our program to
Hmm.
attend one of the lectures to know if she was going to choose the program. Like she was so spoiled for choices. So she had so you want to show that you know about what you're about to do.
Yeah.
You're very much like you want to be sure that this is the best program for you. Um, you don't want to sound desperate. I know for some people that might be their only option, and that might be the only program they even applied to, or they might have applied to other programs, and this was the only interview they were able to make. But I mean, I can't give a specific question because it depends on the program,
Yeah.
but you want to ask an intelligence question. So for me, sometimes silence is better than, if you're going to ask a question that would, hmm, you'd rather just not ask it, right?
Yes. Yes.
But I think it's very important since you would have been informed about the interview and it's
Yeah.
something you had time to
Hmm.
prepare for. I think it's very important to prepare a good question.
Yeah.
So you could say that, you're considering, or what, for example, you could talk about what opportunity the program offers to graduate students in a specific area. Maybe you tell them, your career interests in the midterm or in the short term are this, and that, and you're looking to go into this after your PhD or during your PhD, and you want to know how much, so opportunities or how much support or how much, the university would be able to, like, yeah, how much support you're going to have to be able to achieve that specific goal, then it shows that you're thinking long term. You're not just desperate to get into a program, but you are very deliberate about this program and you're very deliberate about the career path you'd like to pursue.
Hmm.
Although we don't all have it figured out, and that's okay.
Okay.
I think that would be a good question. I
Uh,
don't think it would be a good question to ask about money, funding. I think
yeah.
you should probably email the department if you have questions about funding, not the
Exactly.
people who get to interview you.
Hmm.
um I think you also don't want to ask questions that have obvious answers you can find on the
On the
website,
website. Yeah.
answers
Hmm.
you don't want to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. So I know you briefly mentioned the STAR approach. That is like a very good strategy to use in answering some situational questions. I don't know if, I mean, for the benefit of our viewers, you can, for example, take an example of a situation or a question that demands the use of a STAR approach and then take us through how you would conceptualize your response.
Okay. um for example, if they say tell us how you were able to when tell us about a time when you had a difficult task, or tell us about a time when you yeah, maybe tell us about a time when you had a difficult task and how you were able to achieve it,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Something like that. That I'm not saying that's the exact question they're going to ask, but
Yeah,
something
that's
like that.
similar. Hmm.
So yeah, you could say that it's quite common for you to have experienced, like, over the course of your career or your educational journey, you've had such experiences where you had so much to do, or you had a task, that was quite new to you and you had to walk through it. And then you could say, let me think about an example for myself. um Say for example you had a project you had to work on
Hmm.
and it was the first time, right? I could say that, I was given this specific project. It was a research based project, and I was required to use certain tools and softwares that I hadn't used before. And I had a deadline, and I had to provide, complete all the work within a certain period of time. And so I would say that, I was presented the work was presented to me during the meeting, and the first thing I tried to do was to get as much information as I could from my superiors, right? And I asked all the questions I needed to ask, and I got all of that information. And then I could say that I reached out to my network. So obviously, I have colleagues, I have people that I work with, right? And you could say you consulted all the resources you could consult. For example, you had there are free resources, for example, online. Say you're giving a job that involves some coding, or maybe you need to work on R, for example. There are free R resources online. That's just an example.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a network of, colleagues and people you could reach out to. And so you did all of that, right? And you so so you're given the situation. The situation was the specific project you had to
Yeah.
work on.
Mm-hmm.
The task was what you needed to do. So you needed to complete it within this period of time, and you needed to produce these outputs. The action is the fact that you reached out to your network and you consulted all the resources you could.
Yeah.
You probably took a short course, just to make you familiar with, that specific package or that specific program. You could also say that you had to delegate some tasks. This may not be very relevant for PhD, maybe for like a maybe when you're applying for a job or something, but like you had to delegate certain things to certain people, right? You had to do specific things differently, and you had to put in the extra work, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
had to spend several hours. You had to cut down on things that. So if you had other tasks that were more flexible, that didn't have a very stiff deadline, right? You had to devote more time to doing this particular job. And at the end of the day, you were able to do it, and you basically your team or the people who gave you the task were impressed by what you had done. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have more. I use the STAR approach. So when I was applying for my Chevening scholarship, I use it for like my leadership and networking experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It's more ideal for such. Yeah, it's very. If you want to give like a leadership or networking related experience, it's a
Yeah.
very good tool. For my work experience, the STAR approach may not be the most because when you want to talk about your work experience, you're not picking on one thing. You
Yeah.
are
Mm-hmm.
taking them through a process. So if you're going to talk about your work experience, you may not strictly use the STAR approach. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, as you rightly said, for some situations that you think the star approach could fit in, you could easily chip that in and use it as a guide on
Yeah.
how to respond. Right. So we've looked at the application process, your experiences with the interview. For prospective applicants who are looking to apply to PhD or even master's program, what advice in your own words, what advice would you give to people who are planning to apply to graduate school, especially PhD?
Okay, so are you talking about like to help like choosing a program, for example, or the actual application itself, or everything?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of general advice, for example, uh, do thorough research before you apply, or early application, or yes, or so you could take maybe specific areas of the application, maybe application, what you need to do, interview, what you need to do, and something like that.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just go briefly. In terms of choosing, I recommend what I do is I know the program I want. I know what universities I'm considering. I know what countries I'm considering. So I make a list, and then I streamline this list as I do my research. So if I'm considering universities in Canada and the US, for example, and I'm considering a specific program, for Canada, it's easy because you don't have 1,000 universities, but for the US, it might be more difficult because there's like tons of schools, right? So for Canada, I just knew I had a list of all the universities, and I knew that these are the ones I want to go to, and
Mm.
these are the ones I want to, consider. And so what I did, so if you're looking at Canada, it's okay. If you're looking at the US, it's okay. Once you make a list of those universities, I went to them individually, looked for the ones that had the program and had funding, anyone that didn't have the specific program I wanted or didn't have the funding I wanted, I struck them off my list. Anyone who was not accepting applications within the space of time I had to apply, I struck them off my list. So I ended up with a very more streamlined list, right, of universities and programs that I knew were accepting applications, where the programs I wanted and had space and funding, and so I applied to those. For the UK, it's easier. They have websites, findapphd.com and jobs.ac.uk. You're going to find almost all UK PhD opportunities on these websites. I don't know if Canada has like a central PhD application website. I'm not aware of one. There might be, or the US. I don't know. But for Canada and the US, when people ask me, I tell them you might have to go from school to school, like to
Yeah.
identify programs you want. Now, having said that, early application is very important. I'm gonna preach what I don't practice, right? Or what I did not practice. I didn't. I started applying like 10 days to the deadline.
Wow.
I yes. I started emailing professors 12 days to the deadline, but it's not good.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah. I have to start
I
early.
was lucky. I was lucky. Don't do that. Email professors very early, so you give them enough time. You have enough time to send them reminders without spamming them. And some people are going to decline, and so you have time to email other people, so you get someone to supervise you on time. So I think it's a good time to start that. And I don't know if it's the best time, but if I were to redo this, I'm going to start doing when the fall starts. Applications close like 1st of December. So I think starting by September is a good time.
Yeah.
I think you have 3 to 4 months to, email people. So I think that's a good time. That's about emailing professors. Then the next thing, your statement of purpose. How I wrote my statement of purpose, I answered specifically what they asked for. So if you check the McGill website for my program, they have 6 or 7 questions they would say they want you to discuss. So if you check my statement of purpose, I just had 6 or 7 paragraphs that exactly answered all of those
All the
questions
questions.
in the best way I could. I didn't beat around the bush. I didn't see anything they did not ask for. I said what they wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was very specific. So I mentioned names of specific lecturers. I mentioned names of specific courses. I mentioned names of specific journal clubs that I wanted to, really attend,
Yeah.
and things I looked forward to. And I mentioned the breadth and the expertise within the faculty and how it was going to be good for my collaboration. I had 2 research interests, and I was very honest. I said I am very interested in this field primarily, but I'm also interested in this field. Then in the next section, I talked about how I could work in those 2 fields and collaborate with people, right? So you could see I had put a lot of thought into my
Yeah.
interest and what I wanted to do. I didn't just have like interest all over the place. So statement of purpose, people ask me, and I say that I've not used the same statement of purpose for any of the schools, masters and PhD. All the statements of purpose for different universities are always very different, because
Yeah.
I would go to the website and see what they're asking for and give them exactly what
Yeah.
they've requested for, nothing less,
Yeah.
than that. In terms of your transcripts and other certificates, other documents, it depends on where you're from. I come from my university. Getting your transcript could be a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to get that early.
Very
You
early.
don't want to. So I remember, so McGill would let you submit a student copy of you, an official copy, though it had to be signed by the registrar and all that. But you could submit that yourself. But when they give you the admission, your university must send your transcript to them. It
Okay.
can't come from you. It mustn't come from you. So immediately I submitted my student copy, which was official. I emailed them to say that my university takes at least 6 months to produce a transcript. Can I please begin to process it now? They said, no, you can't do it till we give you admission, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I emailed them like twice. I was like, I just kept emailing them because I knew that if I just wanted to be that if it got to a point where they had to give me extra time, they would have been like, this girl emailed us like
Yeah.
long before she already told us about this problem, right? So that was the reason. I knew they're probably not going to agree, but I just wanted to make them aware, right? I was quite lucky to get my transcript sent within a short period of time. So just saying something you want to start early. Any other specific tips? Your CV. Make your CV as good. I spend a lot of hours working on my CV, and if I need to submit an application, I submitted an application 2 days ago, and my CV is very good. I just needed to update it, but I spent some hours. Like I don't
Yeah,
joke with my
definite.
CV. My CV must be perfect. So you want your CV to be spotless.
Yeah,
Um, um, your recommendation letters. I always reach out to people that I feel are genuinely interested in seeing me grow and progress. People that would be very happy to write me a good recommendation letter. I feel like you could you would know when, I mean, some people pretend, but you're gonna know like people who genuinely want to see
what?
you grow.
That's
I've
true.
heard some bad stories,
Yeah,
not personal. Nothing. No one has written me a bad recommendation letter, but I've heard some bad stories about people who wrote people bad recommendation letters. So you want to ask people who genuinely who would wake up in the middle of the night to write you a letter,
yeah, yeah.
to submit your letters for you. Yeah, I
Thank you.
think I've touched on most things. Yeah,
Yeah, you've pretty much dealt on every single aspect of application. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This has been a very wonderful conversation. Hopefully, all those who are looking to apply, US is not the only destination. Canada has pretty much very uh, uh, great institutions for PhD from epidemiology to other fields. So you should check them out. And I think their requirements is not, they don't require West evaluation in particular. In my experience, so that is another burden lifted off your shoulders. So you should check it out. Omotayo, thank you so much for your time and giving us such an insightful conversation. But before we leave, Nigeria jollof or Ghana jollof, don't be biased. If you haven't eaten a good Ghana jollof before, just say it.
I've had Ghana. I've been to Ghana, and I ate at Asanka Local. I don't know if you know Asanka Local.
I know Asanka.
Um,
Asanka doesn't make the best jollof though. But
oh,
I'm
interesting.
waiting for your results.
Of course, you know Nigerian jollof is better.
Oh,
No,
you're
but
biased.
jollof doesn't belong to any of us. It
I know.
belongs to these
I
other
know.
countries. So
But
we're just like stewards of jollof rice, and we make a,
you see that you
we
can't
are
say
the
it.
loudest.
All right, all right. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.